Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Tom Millington. I'm the Executive Director of Abroadia, and I would like to welcome Sahra Ali from Access Point. She's the CEO and founder of a really wonderful organization, and she has taken the time to speak with us about the work that she does and how she can engage us to consider these themes that she will be presenting to us. Sahra, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, Tom. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Um, my name is Sahra, and I'm very grateful to be here to even see the words access point on the screen. For my work, I think has always centered, but these days more explicitly, on narrative sovereignty and solidarity. Um, I have come into that work, you know, through language. And I grew up in a very rural northern Somali village where our history, our language history is rooted in oral tradition. So really stories and proverbs and, you know, these were passed down as wisdom, as knowledge, as what I now know to be, epistemics. And the work that I do also is, for epistemic justice. But really, I would say that Access Point started there in that village when I was, walking with my older siblings to school and not of school age myself, and just listening to them reading, the Quran, learning in Arabic, and you know, hanging on to those words and like just kind of learning them. And this is a space that you are hosting, Tom, that is, for education, and that in itself, that is really kind of the umbrella that all of this is under, right? Um, what I may be speaking of, in oral traditions in rural Somali, villages, but that is still education and wisdom and knowledge and epistemics and pedagogy, whether or not, Western uh, ideas, confirm that or believe that. Um, and before I had a formalized education in the US, which I immigrated to when I was young, when I was 8, um, I was learning through memory. I was learning through what I hear. When there wasn't that working out the knowledge that you do in a formal capacity. At the same time, in coming to the US and navigating different languages, and then also reading and writing formally and entering, literacy, the literate to Western standards. I think that I watched my mother, growing up in Jersey City when we first came to the US. I watched her navigate, her language and her accent, within the very multiculturally rich, neighborhood we lived in, where people were speaking Spanish from different countries, and and you know, seeing seeing that our poetry, uh, because we write a lot of poetry in Somali, and the way that we use language, um, it's very flexible, it's very bendable. We do so much with language, we play with language, and then being in the US and being formally educated in English, and like constantly unpacking. And this is where the identity stuff comes in, constantly unpacking, the language that I'm being told of me. And it's really interesting when you sent me that glossary of terms. And I was going through some of that, and like some of it was legalese, and I even with those words, I kept thinking, okay, like even those words were not made, in an equitable fashion, right? They were not. So to to kind of just get off the language a little bit and go maybe more into the actual work of it, you know, it became a social justice effort for me, this whole language and language was my access point. Writing was my access, right? Like once I started finding writing, that was a way to formalize my curiosity, my education. Like that was it. So when I became like a writer, when I did, journalism, it was always that the stories and the things that I wanted to report on and to talk about. And I didn't work for mainstream, I didn't work for a newsroom, and it's the same thing with academia. I also work within academia, but I've never, formally worked for one institution. And I think that that is also a part of this narrative, the sovereignty, really the sovereignty, whether that's, sovereignty over our stories, sovereignty over our knowledge systems, even acknowledging that, the global majority has a knowledge system and a pedagogy that Western epistemics cannot, speak to. And you know, I did, I'm a writer. I do diversity and equity consulting. I've been doing that for 10 years. And really during the 2020s, after the murder of George Floyd, and I was doing a number of writing. I mean, I remember writing something for Reader's Digest on um, whether or not we should be saying Black or African American. And, you know, at some point, I think around that time, my work, my writing, my consulting, my curriculum development in schools, all of that kind of just became, you know, this this almost like language war, this, this deep misunderstanding that was costing like us in so many ways, us in the US, like in so many ways. And I think that that's when my work entered, more of a globalized, almost systemic, um, I guess, shape. Because what I recognized was that we are living in, deeply neocolonial systems, and decolonial work, um, and decolonial the work that has been done and the language that is in decolonial work, um, that that kind of became more of my mission. Like it just kind of became a little bit more clear because I was in so many different spaces. And I also must note that I spent a deep number of years forging my life in very white spaces, in the mountains. I live in Alaska half the year now, but I've had a relationship with Alaska for almost a decade. And I also lived in rural Vermont for a long time. I've lived in Colorado. I've lived in deeply, deeply white spaces where I've always had to negotiate my identity. And I'm from Somalia. I'm Muslim. I have a Muslim name. There's whatever's happening in the country was always reflected in the conversations that I was having in my community. And it was very loud. And I was also always doing this work of disseminating, for some audience, whether that is, global audience, which that is my efforts these days. And to go back to the work of Access Point, how even, the work that I do also now, the past few years is also has a uh, tech component, public interest technology. I did some software development and training, and was really interested in, AI ethics and large language models and training and language there. And Naturally, I ended up, in AI governance. Um, so I ended up just kind of putting everything under sovereignty, narrative sovereignty, and solidarity. And I did that on purpose because the work that I do does have range and breadth. And, when I'm in a conference, there is the formal credentializing that is needed, which, I also, am critical of. The At the same time, we are not naming a lot of what's happening and what we see. So if I do solidarity workshop and you're a CEO, someone else comes who's, maybe a president of a organization or a president of a university or something, or then all these industry folks come, all these academics come, and, you know, they're expecting to hear best practices, right? Like they're expecting to hear the words, they're not expecting to hear solidarity, right? Like that's not, and I've done social work, like I know that I know the words that, how some words, and we speak therapy, talk to each other all the time in society. But I did solidarity, especially activated solidarity, for that reason, that we need to make the connections between what we're calling the third world and who we are bombing to also the students that are coming from those countries that want to go to other countries and do language transfer, knowledge transfer, because that's what this is. It's transfer. It's not it's not or it shouldn't be extractive. It shouldn't be manipulative. It shouldn't be just feeding, Western pedagogy and pedestalizing it in some way. It should be very, very much like a mutually beneficial thing, and it's not. And to also drive that point home, that there should be a difference between statelessness and those of us who can move around, and the privilege and the power behind our identity markers. And if I stand up in a room and I start using, jargon to talk about the fact that, my work also supports people who are in war zones and doing their PhDs, or people who are actively in war zones, but also they're doctors, they're engineers, and they can't get into they can't relocate to the UK after they get into Oxford because they have a Sudanese passport. So I say solidarity, like I'm naming that. We can talk about the systemics of it, and again, Access Point does that. It caters to that. But if I'm trying to bring people in, I'm not interested, and especially if we're talking about language and if we're talking about narrative sovereignty, which a lot of people don't know. What does that even mean? What is narrative sovereignty? Like that's why I try to start with story, right? Like in America, because we're in our own little bubble and incubator, we don't understand. Like I live, half the year for a number of years. I live half the year in Southeast Asia. I'm from East Africa. I go through Europe a lot. I speak multiple languages. I'm learning. I'm trying to learn multiple languages as well. Um, the like the the myopia, that we have in the US, like the ethnocentrism that we have, the lack of knowledge that we have on other cultures, that has deeply, deeply stifled us. Deeply. And when I say narrative sovereignty, it also means like we as Americans, like taking back like our own sovereignty about the stories that are told about us, because it's not a monolith. So to be able to kind of go through these worlds as a nomad, to come from pastoral nomads from village in Somalia, to be able to, be doing it on a global scale and meeting people through language, through education, through curriculum development, through conversations about borders. And, if we're going to talk about borders, let's talk about borders, right? We don't need to like go around the language like that doesn't do anything for us, because the feelings and the discomfort and that we have around our privileges, it's still going to surface whether or not we engage with the truth of the language. So I'm going to put solidarity right in front of you. I'm going to put narrative right in front of you. I'm going to put decolonial right in front of you, right? Because if not, then we just sit on our hands and we say, well, racism is finished. Colonialism is finished. And that's not true, because if most people knew how many, how much money the French government makes off of African countries, I don't think we would I don't think we would say colonialism is dead, you know? So yeah, that I said a lot there, but um the benefit, I think, of having a space where you just let the person speak is that there are many, many entryways. Um, and I centered a lot of this on language and narrative, because my work is out there and it's communal and it's in conversation. I love the global thoughts. It's in conversation with your work, Tom, and also so many other folks who are really working out how to engage with their own equity practices um, in a way that is redemptive and culturally relevant and just significant for them, and intentional. And I try not to separate. I really, really try not to separate the mission and the purpose from the poetry and the pain of it. So thank you so much for the space.
Thank you, Sahra. The thoughts are very good as always. Very thought provoking. And just for our viewers out there, I want to let you know that the glossary list that I sent her was the Forum on Education Abroad's glossary of terms that are used in the field, education abroad and things like that. Because my thinking was, is there anything, what narrative sovereignty do we see here? What terms are
Yeah,
more imposed than
yeah,
really creating a space for people?
yeah,
And ever since I first met you, Safra, that term narrative sovereignty has really hit me and has really gotten me to think about a lot of things. Going back to international education now, with some of these conferences, which are very expensive, are there spaces for those who are unemployed? Are there spaces
hmm
for those who just don't have very deep budgets?
hmm
Um, so I think I like the idea that what you're saying about spaces. I think it's very, very important. So now let's get to Access Point. What does Access Point do?
So what does Access Point do? So it first started with doing interviews. I was doing a fellowship, leadership and technology fellowship with Virginia Tech. And it was looking at leadership in technology from a humanities lens. And, I'm in the public interest technology space. So I started doing, these chats where I wanted to speak with people that were within, the public interest technology sector. But it also was coinciding with, you know, uh, it was coinciding with what was happening in Sudan. And I think, yeah, yeah, I think Gaza was still, yeah, I think it was just like right around that time. So at some point it became, I just started, kind of interviewing folks on the field, in the field. And then it also, became, and I think that's where the decolonial work came in. Um, and there's another arm of it that's workshops. So I do narrative reframe workshops, and that is I do it with organizations and with folks, mainly academics, folks in the nonprofit space, um, folks in the social justice space, humanitarians, um, and we work through almost like unlearning the narrative that we are fed about ourselves and our work. So I think you might have engaged with my language audit, which it stemmed from my other workshop, which is the solidarity workshop. And that is specifically for folks that are in the humanitarian space. I also offer it for folks who are under bombardment or, in statelessness. Obviously those are completely free. That kind of becomes more of a space to communicate their needs openly. But for the other side of it, you know, the the narrative reframe, we systematically go through um the ways that we can rework the narratives about what we have been told. And I use, Sylvia Wynter, Frantz Fanon, Bell Hooks, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, um, Thich Nhat Hanh, who was an incredible Vietnamese Zen monk, who was in exile for, I think 40 years, 30, 40 years. Um, but, he died in his 90s. And he had many monasteries and a huge following, and brilliant teacher. And he was able to die back home, after being in exile for so long. And he writes extensively. And those are just some of the works, but I center decolonial works and narrative works. Toni Morrison, she's incredible with narrative, and a lot of Black American writers um, that in history that have, you know, been like, people like James Baldwin, who've been incredibly exemplary at being able to translate what their experience is, and at the same time have people also resonate deeply and shine a light on also what's happening. Um, Ta-Nehisi Coates does that modern day. But so with narrative reframe, it's founded on that. That's the scholarship of it. It's the colonial texts, and through many. And I also use my own practices as well. I um, I practiced and still do Zen for many years, and I've spent time at monastery and temple, that contemplative. I mean, that's how I met Thich Nhat Hanh, and many others. So there's a spiritual component in the sense, in the humanity sense, philosophically, I guess I would say, because the narrative reframe is not just, oh, hey, here are all these texts. Let's retrain your, your mind and, neuroplasticity. It's also like, um, when you're looking at a glossary of terms like that at your job, um, what's coming up for you? Is it accurate? When you're doing, when you're doing a survey, for a grant that you're going to give to some, small community organization in Guatemala, are you like, how are you looking at the language of the people, and what is being used, to the descriptors that are being used to talk about their situation, as it's, because it's often as it's in relationship with the Western organization, right? Or the Western institution. So it really forces you in some way to meet the personal, to interrogate the personal, but it also gives you tools, to be able to unpack it. And with narrative reframe, there's also like a 6-week thing, that I'm designing, that I will be advertising soon. Solidarity workshops. So activated solidarity, I've already discussed that. At some point, I decided that it was, because I was speaking to all of these people that are doing research, decolonial research, mainly in Europe, um, and and they're people from, the global majority, and very diverse, but they're mainly Europe, UK, some in the US, certainly some in Southeast Asia as well, and Africa. Um, but they were very, very frustrated that, they have all of these, they have job security, and they go to conferences, but they didn't feel like their research was valued, and I, because I work within academia, but I'm not like formally, I don't belong to any institution. I really saw this need and this gap to, excuse me, disseminate the information of solidarity, right? And naturally, the way that I saw that, because I have the DEI background and the best practices, and that formal side of it, it was through language. It was through, okay, well, what are the language and the narratives that is limiting, folks that are really trying to do deep research, but they're feeling stifled. They're feeling like, they're the master in some way, like and they can't understand. And it's because they're in the machine, right? I mean, that's really what it is, right? I mean, the institution is the machine. I mean, we can go back to Harvard's roots, and see, what, like it's where they were, during enslavement times, like there there's all of these connections. So I started making language of solidarity, and that's where that audit came from, the language audit, for solidarity work. And it was very, very popular, and it was heavily shared. And I was really, really excited about it, that it did find an audience. And yet at the same time, it is a ongoing battle, right? And there's an isolation that happens to folks that are within academia. And I think certainly, like, we need more conversations with those people in a public square. And we need to democratize and deprivilege and decenter, these knowledge systems, to be able to broaden access, but also to make the work and the research that is being done, um, for the people, not just on the people. So those are the workshops. And then of course there's like speaking engagements that I do, curriculum development. I've been doing curriculum development for, over 10 years, probably more. I've done it in the US, I've done it in Canada and in Thailand. And you know, it's also very much related to narrative and storytelling. And it might be a little bit more technical and mechanical, but and then I also do AI literacy consulting and governance. I do right now. I there's an organization that I work for called Corporation for Public Interest Technology, and we're a public benefit company that works on just finding equitable. Well, it's mainly AI governance, so policy and AI governance, and which is really really important these days, and especially with the lack of regulation that is coming out of the U.S. But really try to find techno solutions that are, socio-techno solutions that are, of public interest. Um, so through because of that, I also do AI literacy, with libraries, with schools, in communities. I'm really, really interested in having more conversations around AI literacy versus, AI, mastership, because I think that going back to access. I'm a child of the internet era. I was born in the late 80s. I have 1 year of the 80s. But I consider myself very heavily 90s. But the I think it's really, really important to understand what AI is, but also understand what large language models are, and to understand the power and sovereignty in that or lack thereof, and representation. So in lots of ways, my DEI work is embedded in all of this. And it's the same with my writing, which I haven't stopped doing my writing, but everything is kind of under this umbrella of Access Point, which, just kind of came to me, you know. There's a few years ago when I was learning how to code, I was talking to this new friend, and he he had said I told him that I was from Somalia, and he had said, "Oh wow, like that's," so he's like, you kind of went 2,000 years into the future, because I told him, I grew up, rural, like just no electricity, just, beautiful life, but just, rural. And I never really thought, oh, the arc 2,000 years, but now I meditate on that so much now because I think, for us from a Western perspective, that's like, oh, wow, like she came out of the Stone Age almost, right? But in another way, it's like, whoa, what about Somalia? Like what knowledge systems? Because it's not, it's not like coding is just another, technological advancement, but people in the past 2,000 years in Somalia had their own knowledge systems and their own, so it's just kind of like depending on perspective, like 2,000 years, what, like it's like, oh, we like because of the West, that person is now this, and it's I don't know. There's something you understand, like there's something about it that I'm still kind of working with, and I think that that's really the beauty of the knowledge, the narrative sovereignty and the solidarity, activated solidarity. It's almost like the narrative sovereignty is the narrative reframe is the decolonizing of your mind and your body and your space, and then the activated solidarity helps you delve into the language and the the dynamics that could help um, really make the change that you want, like the action, the action part, not just, oh, I feel bad. I'm doing the work, but I feel bad. How do I, get closer?
Very good. I think one thing that you had mentioned earlier that stands out to me is when you said constantly unpacking. So I think
Mm,
that's what if we are really serious about uh, engaging and becoming, and showing solidarity with others,
mhm,
it's not just a one-time thing. I think too many of us, I'm not just talking about international education, but in any other discipline or field, people will go to a conference and say, "Yeah, hey, I act in solidarity." Then they go home, and then
yep.
they return to their daily routine, their quotidian
Hmm.
day,
Hmm.
routine, and that's it. So I like the idea of constantly unpacking means constantly reflecting, constantly thinking, you know, um, about the milieu, about where you're working, about the organization that you're in, and about the work that you do. Um, I think that's a key word. And of course, narrative reframe, activated solidarity, and narrative sovereignty are all concepts that more of us should know and become
Hmm.
familiar with. So I certainly encourage people
Thank you.
to work with you and take part in your workshops. I think there's a lot of work, as you know, that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, really, you said it there. It's not it's not, we don't have to be, we would be able to be more explicit with our asks if we didn't, have to socially hide, like fearing consequences, some sort of social consequence, So, but all of that I think is personal. It's personal work. So the constant unpacking is personal. So I think, that's why I put that under. And that's for me as well. I'm constantly, it's not, I haven't arrived at anywhere. But I think that the the proverb of going, if you want to go fast, go alone, which I know very well as a nomad. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's the goal here. So thank you, Tom, so much for hosting this space and me.
Well, thank you very much, Safra. I appreciate the thoughts, the thinking, and I encourage people to visit your website. I'll be putting that up on the Broadia website so that they can go to you. So thank you very much, Safra, for your time, your thoughts, your thoughtfulness. I really appreciate it.
Mm,
And I think you've given me
thank you.
something to think about. I'm already starting to do that. And I hope you can inspire others to reflect the same way.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. And we will talk again soon.
Mm, yes, thank you. Peace.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.